Hello, everybody. Welcome, my friends, wherever you are listening in the world. It's good to have you back. Now, we are in the middle of a big holiday in Japan called Golden Week. Now, in Golden Week, what we have is a charabang will turn up on the beach. And you can see, for them watching you on YouTube, I have got my Sushi Film Festival wristband. And that were for Sunday night. Me and a friend of mine went and watched a movie on the beach, and it's here for a week. They turn up every Golden Week, and they build bars, they build restaurants on the beach, and they put up a big cinema screen. And every night, between the 29th of April and the 6th of May, they put a different film on every night. And the one that stuck out for me that I wanted to watch on Sunday night was this one film about street art. Now, this episode is going to be very Bristol centric, and I'll tell you why as we go along. But let me just give you a bit of history and go back in time to the late 80s, early to mid 90s. Now, in the early to mid 90s, Manchester were just running away with it. Whatever competition they were in, other cities were trying to get in on it, but nobody really could touch Manchester in that period of time. Everything were going on up there. London had sort of had its nose knocked out of joint a bit, and Manchester were where it were at. But coming up on the rails were two other cities, and they were trying to wrestle that crown away from them, and they nearly did. They nearly did. Now, Liverpool were trying, but the way that Thatcher had gone about destroying fucking Liverpool, absolutely destroying Liverpool, they didn't really have the resources to compete with Manchester. So try as they might, and they did pump out some good stuff, but try as they might, Thatcher had just kneecapped them. So they really wanted the competition. The two cities that were coming up to grab that crown off Manchester were Sheffield and Bristol. And today we're going to talk about Bristol, because the movie I watched was about Bristol's most famous artist. And I didn't realise that this artist was from Bristol until I watched this documentary on Sunday. Now, the documentary in question is Outlaw Art, and I implore you all to go and watch this documentary. It's fantastic. For them of you who are of a certain age, or maybe a bit younger than me, you will remember some of this stuff. Now, I'd learned a lot of this stuff from reading those lad mags of the 90s, Loaded, FHM, GQ, stuff like that. And I'd forgot about it. Just like 8 Ace from Viz. Absolutely fantastic characters that you forget about. And then when they come back, when you think about them again, you just think, how fantastic was that? And this documentary helped me recall all that. Outlaw Art. I'll put a link in below on YouTube, and I'll put a link in the description on podcast, so you'll be able to find it all there. Now, if I say to you the most famous artist in the world at the moment, and possibly for the last 20, 25 years, this artist is anonymous. Nobody has a fucking clue who he is, although they're starting to guess who he is. Yep, you've got it. Talking about Banksy. Now, I didn't even know that Banksy were from Bristol. I thought it were from up north. I thought it was from my neck of the woods, from Leeds. But then this documentary, Damien Hirst is from Leeds. fucking me being a knobhead, I never realised that Banksy were from Bristol. So what you had in the 90s were Manchester, unreachable, absolutely unreachable. Sheffield, you had pulp coming out of Sheffield, the great pulp, and you had the boxing. The boxing stables were coming out of Sheffield too. Prince Nazim Hamed, one of the best in the 90s. Now Bristol were also on the undercard. Massive Attack, Portishead. But where Bristol could not be touched was street art. Street art. They had so many gangs of graffiti artists down there that no other city in the UK had. No other city in the UK had. So with the street artists in Bristol, the fella from Massive Attack had gone over to New York and he'd spent a couple of years in New York, and he had seen these graffiti artists painting fucking trains. Now you think, you spray a wall, the only people that are going to see that art are the people that walk past that wall. And in New York, that could be thousands and thousands of people. You spray the side of a train, hundreds of thousands of people are going to see that art, because that train is going through one of the most populated cities in the world. Now, the fella from Massive Attack came back to Bristol and he started doing his own stuff, and it sort of changed the game. It changed the game. So I'm going to put him on back burner for now. And I'm going to ask you to think about dodgy areas in your hometown, in your hometowns. Everybody's got one. Don't matter how posh the city is, there's always a place where the shit munchers live. Now, in Bradford, I didn't live in any of those places, but I was adjacent to them. Homewood, Buttershaw, Delphil Estate. Those three places in South Bradford are the dodgy places. Now, because Bradford is so vast and so run down, you had so many other places around the north, the east, and the west of Bradford that were dodgy. Every city has got these places. Bristol's no different. Now, my image of Bristol was posh. You know, it's south, but it's not south. It's the southwest. Isambard, Kingdom Brunel had his finest hour there with the Clifton Suspension Bridge. It links Bristol with North Somerset over the Avon Gorge. It was built in the mid-1800s and an absolute fucking game changer. He's left his mark on that city, even though he's not from there. When I think of Isambard, Kingdom Brunel, I think of Clifton, the Clifton Suspension Bridge. So it's all there. Now, Hitler tried to bomb the fuck out of it. It came back. Thatcher, again, she fucked everything up that was industry based. She were all about the city. She tried to ruin it. And it's still not recovered from that. So in Bristol, you've got Barton Hill. Now, Barton Hill is the most run-down place in Bristol. So, no prospects, no money. People have got no to do. So the kids in the late 80s, early 90s, all they were doing were taking drugs and stealing cars. And what you had in Barton Hill was a group of street artists that were coming out. Just kids getting out of bed in the middle of the night while parents were asleep, getting out of the bedroom windows or going very quietly out at the door and meeting up with their mates and spraying walls, coming up with designs, drawing out the designs at home, going out during the day and scouting good walls where they could spray, where they had no chance of getting caught. And that's what they would do. They were putting all their attention into that. And you had spray gangs. I had a friend in the UK my friend Guy, and he lived on the same street as me. He went out and sprayed a load of walls. Fantastic artist. And he got away with it. He got away with it and got away with it, but he stopped doing it. And you just think, if he'd have just kept on doing it, he were the one out of all the lot of us. He were the artist. So Banksy were coming up in this time. I know he's an anonymous artist, but from the research I've done, it appears that he's about 5 or 6 years older than me. So he would have been coming up around 83, 84 when all that movement were going on in Bristol. He would have been prime for it. And he were running around with these spray gangs, just sort of like begging to give him a go. And he was just this random tagger. So what were happening in Bristol at that moment is car shops were getting robbed, and they were going in, and these young kids, they weren't stealing cars anymore, they were stealing paint. So someone would go into one of these shops, they'd cause a disruption, the whole shelf of paint would be stolen, and off they'd trot. Car showrooms were getting broken into in the middle of the night. Only paint was getting stolen. The cash tills were getting left. They were just stealing paint so they could go out and paint. So what happened was the powers that be were getting really pissed off with this. The police would have a task force. They would go out and take photos of these pieces, and they would start to link the artist with the street art and lock these graffiti artists up for significant lengths of time just to get them off the street. But this just emboldened them to be more careful and to go out and do more pieces out there on the street. So it was kind of like a military operation going out and doing this. And that's what he came up in. Now, there was one fella, and there is always one fella. It were Alan McGee with the music, it were Frank Warren with the boxing, and it were John Nation with the street art. Now, John Nation was the manager or youth worker at Barton Hill Youth Club. If you remember, I said Barton Hill with that rough area of Bristol. And he said to these kids, look, you're getting locked up, you're getting criminal records. I don't want you to have this strike against your character, because when you go forward in life, your future employers are going to look at that and go, nah, not for me. So what he did was, he opened up his youth club, but he opened the walls of his youth club. He opened it all up, and he said, right, legal walls. These walls are legal. You can practice your trade here. Off you go. And these kids just came out in daylight and worked on their art. And that is where all these kids learnt their trade. Now, as good as an idea that may be, that John Nation came up with, it kind of, you only have so many square meters on side of a youth club. So if you look at a map of where the youth club is, there's a train track that runs along the side of the youth club. And as the walls filled up, the graffiti sort of spread. And it spread down to the train tracks. It spread to the side of the train tracks, and all the walls down there got sprayed up. Now, I do like seeing graffiti art when it's done well, but people's houses were getting sprayed. People's front doors were getting sprayed. The side, people's house walls were getting sprayed, and not with decent pieces. They were just getting tagged. So you just have people's names on the side of your house. which can look fucking awful. So that became a problem. So the police went for this John Nation and they locked him up and they wanted names. He went to court many, many times. Street art was put in front of him. He knew exactly who the artists were, but he never gave it up. He never gave up any names. So that sort of boosted his reputation as a patron of the arts, shall we say, in Bristol. So he was almost untouchable in this world because he was giving these kids a chance. Now, out of that, you get Banksy. Now, what happened was Banksy was spraying a wall one day, and the police came upon him, and they just scattered. The police were running here, there, and everywhere. It was middle at night, so Banksy jumped under a rubbish truck, a rubbish wagon, a garbage truck, as you say in America. And while he were under there, he could see the police officers' feet running about trying to find them. They didn't have any dogs with them. And he just waited there. But as he were waiting, he's sort of on his back and he looks up and he sees on the bumper of a garbage truck in Bristol, they had a three numbers stenciled in on the bumper of a garbage truck. And that lit the light bulb for Banksy, because what takes up the most time, think about it, what takes up the most time when you are spraying street art is the actual spraying of it. So Banksy thought, if I can cut out the stencils at home, you cut out 3 stencils, you go out, you put one stencil up, you spray it, you take it off, second, third, you can be in and out in under 5 minutes. And that's where Banksy's street art comes from. So what he started to do was go out with these stencils and just drop pieces with his stencils. And that's how Banksy came to be. That's how now some of his pieces are selling for millions and millions. So after exhausting Bristol, off he trotted down to London. Now, before the whole of London got gentrified in the 90s, Tower Hamlets was one of the most rundown places in London. So that's where he decided to base himself. And he went about it like nothing else. So having made a reputation for himself in Bristol, he met up with like-minded artists in London. And they started to go about this stencil art in London. So what they would do, they would have a bar where they would meet, this kind of dive bar. Now, because it was so out of the way, nobody would venture down there. That bar would stay open until 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So what they would do is they would make the stencils in the back bar, in the beer garden, and then they'd be getting pissed, and out they'd go, shit-faced, and go spraying around the bridges and the walls of Tower Hamlets. Now, people were starting to take notice of Banksy. They were starting to take notice of him, and he needed to make money. So what he would do, he would have art shows in this pub, and just spray stuff. So they'd be on a wheel, just stencil the stuff, 1 of 250, 2 of 250. They'd go downstairs. These paintings would sell for 200 or 300 quid a go, and they were just as quickly as they were getting made. These pieces, they weren't even dry, and they were selling, and that would be bringing the money in. So then what happened is he would spray one of his pieces on a wall, and the person who owned that wall would cut out the fucking wall and then put it on an art display. And then those pieces that were on the wall were selling for hundreds of thousands of pounds. So much so that people were copying it. Now, because Banksy has become so popular now, when a Banksy goes up, to make sure that it's not a fake, Banksy has to issue a certificate of authentication just to make sure that these pieces are authentic before people start knocking the walls down. Which is amazing to me. And when you think of, there were 2013, he announced that over a 2-week period, he would go around New York in a cat and mouse venture and spray a piece a night. So they were spraying on walls, they were spraying on vans, they were spraying up the side of buildings, and the police could never catch them. And then after 2 weeks, it were announced that he'd gone. Poof, blown, gone like the wind. Still anonymous. Still anonymous. He then opened a gallery in Los Angeles. No, this was before. This was in 2006 or 2008. And the interviews were saying there were so many people that were turning up. The fella that were running the art gallery did not give a shit who you were. You were queuing up outside. There were one person that he let in, and that was Sacha Baron Cohen, and that were only because they were a fan. He was the only person that got to the front of that queue and let in without queuing. Everybody else were made to queue. Brad and Angelina turned up. You're queuing. Nobody were getting to the front. Nobody were getting to the front. They even bought some of his paintings. Now you think this is just a fella that were on dole, a teenager that was on the dole in the early 90s, that were just leaving his parents' house at 3 o'clock in the morning and going and spraying walls. To go from that to you spray something, the wall gets taken away, and it's making somebody up to $1 million for their street art. To go from that to that is the story. And I mean, going into Gaza and spraying, this was 2018, 2019, and spraying the wall in Gaza. Now, going and spraying the wall in Gaza, he had his finger on the pulse way before anybody else. And he's British, and it's something that we should be proud of. The music was good. The writing was good. The art was fantastic. Damien Hirst, Banksy, all that stuff just made the UK fantastic in the 90s. And that movie, that documentary, just sort of got my brain out of the... My brain has only got enough storage. And when I learn new shit, I forget old shit. And this movie were a good recall button for me. And the Banksy story I didn't really know much of. I do now. I've shared a bit of it with you. Go and watch the movie. Outlaw Art. It's fantastic. And I will see you again next week. Get out there and spray them walls, kids. See you later.